the BSI standard around knowledge management as well. So if I need anything on knowledge management, Judy is the person I always go to get help and advice, and even just have a quick chat about this area, subject area. So I'd like to introduce Judy Payne today. I'll leave Judy to take over. And if you've got any questions throughout the session, please pop it in the chat function, and we'll answer it as we go along as well. So thank you very much. And Judy, is it okay to pass over to you?
It certainly is. Thank you for that glowing introduction. I should say I've learned a lot from Michael as well. So hello again, everybody. Hello. Thank you so much for joining. We have 80 people. That's great. And it's going up. It keeps going up. So that's fantastic. 80 people. I'm going to start off with a key message. Knowledge management and information management, which I will call KM and IM, are both important. They need each other, but they are not the same. So full disclosure, on a KM-IM spectrum, if there is such a thing, I'm about here. And I'm very interested in this bit in the middle. I've been exploring the boundaries of knowledge management because I realised that a lot of us stay in our own little boxes and don't quite appreciate what might be right next door. The ideas that I'm going to share with you are explained in a little more detail in an article that's just been published in Business Information Review. Because I'm more KM than IM, I needed some help with the article, which I got from John Fryer. So thanks to John. And I also ought to say that I've already run this session at a CILIP CPD webinar. And I know that there is at least one person here who joined that webinar. So I'm going to try to make this a little bit different, but I won't be offended if you leave because you think it's all the same. So I'm going to kick off with a couple of anecdotes, and then we're going to get a bit more interactive. So here's the first anecdote. At the CILIP conference last summer, Dom Davies, who is here, hello Dom, delivered a fantastic presentation all about his KM work at DSTL. And I was really impressed by this presentation, and I rushed down to the front afterwards and congratulated Dom for the best KM case study that I'd heard for a long time. As we were talking, someone else rushed to the front and congratulated Dom for an excellent example of information management. Incidentally, at that same conference, I observed that a lot of people who knew what they were talking about were using the terms knowledge, information, and data almost interchangeably. Second anecdote. A couple of months later, I was at a workshop in London. I'm being deliberately vague here, and that this isn't the person's real name. We were talking about sharing knowledge. When somebody who has knowledge in their job title said, we don't need to share knowledge because everyone can find all the knowledge they need using Google. So to me, those two anecdotes illustrate that there is some confusion between KM and IM and between knowledge and information in different ways, in different ways. The big difference is that I know that Dom Davies understands very well the difference between knowledge management and information management. But why are we in this position where there's confusion? How did it happen? And does it matter? We're going to come back to these questions. But first, we're going to do a poll because I'd like to know a little bit more about you and your take on knowledge and information. It's not a test. So that should be showing on your screens now. Not surprising, it's looking as most people are towards the KM end. Okay, are we stopping the poll there, Louise?
Hi, Judy. It should continue. I've just shown the results.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's everybody that's going to respond now, so I'll stop that one.
Okay, thanks. So that it's disappeared, Louise.
Oh.
Can we get it back? We can't, can we?
No, unfortunately not.
All right. Okay. Right. From memory.
Do you want to read it out, Judy?
Yes, please, if you've got it there.
So
Thanks.
we had 32 people said it's more towards KM, 18 towards the IM, 6 in the middle, 18 across the whole spectrum, and 5 didn't know. So that's a good start.
Okay. Okay. That's nice that there are some across the whole spectrum. I'm going to especially welcome feedback from you later. So we have another poll question coming.
Yep, bear with, I'm just pasting it in. Talk amongst yourselves, everyone.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the chat. Emma says, can't see the settings for microphone and video. So no idea.
All participants at the moment are on mute. So you won't be able to change that. You are just on it, yeah. If you want to ask a question, it's just purely by the chat. Okay, nearly there.
Okay. We're still on a we're pausing for the poll.
Yeah. Building up the anticipation, Judy. Here we go.
Well, this is one of the clever features of this platform. Okay, so second question. So Sam Baig was the guy that said we don't need to share knowledge because everyone can find all the knowledge they need using Google. Obviously, that question was too long for the box. I love doing this question. I'm smiling at the results. Okay, well, the interesting thing is nobody has said that Sam Big is right in his statement about knowledge and information. And most people are saying what you get from Google isn't knowledge, it's information. And that is music to my ears, because that's part of the message for this session. Okay. Thank you for taking part in the polls. So this is the plan for the rest of the webinar. I'm going to talk about these 4 things: definitions and why they don't help, which will be brief. You will get a copy of the slides, and you will be able to see the recording of the webinar. So if I will skip over some of the things, especially now I know that you already understand a lot about the difference between knowledge and information. Second is how KM and IM have developed. Then I'm going to talk about the difference between KM and IM, and we get into disputed territory here, and I'm not going to pretend that my view is the only one. I'll give you several views. I'm also going to talk a little bit about where AI fits in and why all of this matters. And then very briefly at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we could do to end the confusion. And I'd quite like that to be I really welcome your ideas about what we can do to end the confusion, because as far as I can see, it's pretty deep-seated. At the end of each of these, most of these sections, I'm going to stop and we'll have a look at the chat. So please type your thoughts and your questions into the chat as we go. We're not saving discussion up all until the end. We will be stopping several times as we go through. Definitions. I've got 3 reasons for starting off with definitions. The first is to get us roughly on the same page about KM and IM, which I suspect we are already, or at least so that you have some idea of what I mean when I use the terms. The second reason is to demonstrate just how difficult it is to define KM or IM concisely and clearly. And the third is to expose some other confusion that exists. And of course, I picked lots of examples that show the confusion, and some of them you might find quite amusing. So let's start with KM. This is a definition that I quite like from Standards Australia. I've changed it a little bit. It mentions the word knowledge. I do like this one. Second one, this is actually from the ISO Knowledge Management Standard, which I was on the working group that produced this standard. That's not the actual definition. The actual definition in the standard is management with regard to knowledge, which is correct as a definition, but it's not terribly helpful. The problem with both of these definitions that we've looked at is that they include the word knowledge. And if you don't know what knowledge is, they don't really help. So let's have a quick look at some definitions of knowledge. So this first one is from Standards Australia again. I think this is a good one. What I like about this one the most is that it mentions people. It also mentions information, but it doesn't mix up information with knowledge. In fact, it sort of clarifies the relationship a bit, because it says that people's knowledge is increased through interaction with information. And I really like that one. Some other definitions of knowledge, there's a few here that are these are all from ISO standards, and you can see those if you search for the ISO online browsing platform. I'm not going to go through them all. I'm just going to say that I really don't like the first three. They define knowledge in terms of information, and that just doesn't make sense to me. I would go as far as to say that they're wrong, the first three, except they might, in KM terms, they're certainly wrong. They might be right in the context of the particular standard that those definitions appear in. The fourth definition, the final one, is from the ISO standard, and that's the one that I think most closely reflects the current understanding of knowledge in knowledge management. But then I would say that, wouldn't I? Because I helped to write that. Let's move on to IM. So this is an ISO definition from the Information and Documentation Foundation and Vocabulary Standard. I think that's quite clear, but like the definitions of KM, this definition of IM includes the word information. So let's have a quick look at some definitions of information, again, from ISO standards. So what have we got in these definitions? We've got data, knowledge, data and knowledge, and knowledge. Okay, I admit I picked the worst ones, and some of these are okay in the context of the standard in which they appear. But if you don't know that, you would be pretty confused. So one of the reasons that these the information management and information definitions are so mixed up is that information is an umbrella term, and it covers a multitude of sub-disciplines. And to understand this better, we're going to have a look at the development of IM and KM. But first, a pause so that we can have a look at the chat. Michael, what have we got in the chat?
A few people are backing up, and like one was it Mark Falconer's one, don't use Google, ask a librarian, which I quite like. So that was quite an interesting one. Ryan's talking about conversations, which you mentioned about the people in the conversations as part of it as well. And Nancy's just asked, I think a lot of people think I only manage documents, where I spend most of my time encouraging knowledge sharing conversations with communities as well. So a lot of people have to try and constantly explain to different people what it actually is, what differences between knowledge management and information management. So that's some of the things that come up from the chat.
And there are lots of people in the chat are mentioning conversation. Thank you. If we have time, which I hope we will, let's come back to this at the end, because I could argue myself, if I take what I'm going to say to its logical conclusion, that it's impossible to share knowledge, and actually it is, but I'm not suggesting that we get rid of the term knowledge sharing, but conversation is a way to get closer to it. Still looking at the chat. Some organisations use knowledge sharing or knowledge exchange instead of KM to get away from IM, yeah, but they're also getting away from KM. But there might be reasons for that, and we will cover some of them. Okay, thank you all. Keep the comments and questions coming in the chat. So I'm going to move on now to how KM and IM have developed. So the early years first. IM emerged first in the late 1970s, when it first became possible to store and distribute large volumes of digital information. In those days, IM was known as data management, and it focused, as you would expect from the name, and possibly, as you remember if you're old enough, it focused on the structuring and storage of data. Document management then followed on the information management side in the 1980s, and this was where people first started talking about delivering the right information to the right people at the right time, first on paper, of course, and later electronically. By the 1990s, we were awash with information, and people had started to question its value. Do we really need all this information? So a new IM discipline of records management was developed. One of the reasons for this was to separate out the important information, the most valuable information, from all of the noise. And hand in hand with that, people started to appreciate the strategic value of the important information, using terms such as asset, which is originally from accounting, and resource, which is an organizational studies term, to describe the strategic nature of information. Whatever it was called, information was important, and it required the attention of strategists and senior managers. KM appeared in the 1990s, while IM was finding its strategic feet. But KM was a strategic subject right from the start. Knowledge was seen right from the 1990s as a key strategic asset or a resource, and various theories were developed that reinforced its importance as a strategic asset or resource. And KM right from the start included tacit knowledge held by individuals, in relationships and in organisations. So KM included managing people, relationships and organisational culture. So the stage seemed set for organisations to adopt KM as a strategic discipline and set of practices. But there was a fly in the KM ointment. Early KM practices included things that I would call real KM, the things on the left on this slide, communities of practice, people finders. But in the days before social media, we had people finders, so we could find people in our organisations and know what they knew about. So we had these real KM practices on the left, but we also included practices on the right in our KM toolkits. And a lot of these practices on the right bear a remarkable resemblance to IM practices. Why did we do this? Well, I was there. I held my hand up. I'm guilty. IM just wasn't on our radar. We really didn't appreciate that IM already had information covered. So this didn't go unnoticed. As early as 1996, Carl Eric Svaby observed these two distinct emerging KM perspectives. He called the one on the right IT track KM, in which knowledge was treated as objects that could be handled in computer systems, in other words, IM, and people track KM, which focused more on processes, human skills and behaviours, what I would call real KM. In 1996, the IT track KM was growing rapidly, and the people track KM was getting left behind, which is why those two arrows are different sizes. Svaby also observed that the two tracks had completely different routes at the bottom of the arrows there. IT track KM came from information science, and people track KM grew out of philosophy, psychology, and sociology. So the two tracks, the two sorts of KM, the people use completely different languages, which caused confusion and made it very difficult for them to communicate when they met, which wasn't very often. And we've still got this problem. We'll see in a moment. Also in the late 1990s, Fahey and Prusak sounded the KM alarm in a landmark paper called The 11 Deadliest Sins of Knowledge Management. Error number 1 is all about failing to distinguish information from knowledge, and all the other errors follow from error number 1. If you haven't read this article, it really is worth a read. You can find it free online, and over 20 years on, most of those sins are still being committed. Let's move on to the 21st century. Once this confusion between IM and KM took hold, it became difficult to get rid of it. KM continued to develop along the IT track and along the people track. So on the IT track, technology vendors jumped on the KM bandwagon and started selling complete KM solutions. And yes, I know they still do, but they're nothing of the kind. KM got a bad name. Some people declared KM dead, and a lot of people just stopped using the term altogether. On the people track, KM practices developed to focus on building relationships and on connecting people across hierarchies in particular, and then on collective problem solving and managing ideas, all the things which we recognise today as being important in innovation. I think the people track, the real KM, has just about caught up with the IT track now, helped by publication of the ISO KM standard, which has legitimised KM. It's made it real. It exists as a standard. It must be real, not that it is perfect. And also by the work that CILIP is doing, thank you, Sonia, on professionalising KM. And of course, we now have AI and machine learning, which I have put on the IT track side of KM. A little sidestep here. A lot of you will be familiar with this. This is Nancy Dixon's 3 Eras of KM, a reflection on how KM has developed that she started in 2009 and updated most recently, I think, in 2018. An important feature of Nancy's model is that although each era has a start date, none has an end date. And it's also interesting to me that Nancy labels the first era information management, even though it's included in a reflection on KM. So IM, going back to IM has developed on its own as well. So as well as document management and records management, various other subdisciplines have appeared, and it's now getting rather crowded under that IM umbrella. And what's included under the IM umbrella quite often varies from organisation to organisation, even more confusing. So where does that leave us? I say we've got a bit of a tangled mess. Anybody who's trying to understand KM and IM for the first time today is faced with a bewildering array of conflicting definitions, thinking and strategies from all 3 of Nancy Dixon's three eras of KM, and from 50 years of IM and all of those subdisciplines under the IM umbrella. And that's before we've even mentioned much data analytics, AI and machine learning, which I'll come back to. So I've done the first 2 of my sections, so I'm going to pause now to take a look at the chat.
Michael, there's some good conversations going on there. Thank you everyone for doing that. Claire Fisher mentioned about they've been using the term organisational learning, and a few others sort of mentioned that there's slight subtle differences between that and KM, but also it could be a balancing act between them. So that's quite interesting there. Dom mentioned about, especially the IT track, about how many EDRM systems have failed and how many times I remember when I first started getting into KM that someone said, oh, we've got a new bit of software that's going to solve our KM issues. and surprise, surprise, they failed. So that's been quite interesting seeing some of the stuff on there. And also, I think Melissa mentioned that sometimes you get it working brilliantly, but they think it could just be managed itself, and everything starts to fall apart after that. And also, a few people have mentioned that they've used slightly different terms for KM, but still just trying to work out what works best for certain organisations, especially ones with legacy ones where maybe an IT system has been sold there in the past and called it KM. They've had to change the words. I know in places I've worked before, I've had to change the words because someone tried to sell an IT system into it to solve the problem. But there's loads of different conversations going on there. So no, thanks everyone. There's a lot of people sort of sharing ideas and also saying, yes, right, I agree with that as well. So.
And I just spot there's a couple of mentions of librarians that a lot of library science includes knowledge management, and yes, I agree it does. And Dom has said all librarians are knowledge managers, not all knowledge managers are librarians. Yeah, and they all know the difference. I wonder. Okay. Melissa said, in my head, I see a pyramid with data management at the top and information management, then data management at the bottom. Okay. That sounds like the DIKW pyramid. We will talk some more about that. For me, KM is the umbrella. It isn't a hierarchy. One of the things that I've noticed, especially from my recent dealings with CILIP, is that very occasionally there's a little bit of friction between the knowledge management people and the information management people. I think it definitely shouldn't be a battle between which one's at the top of the pile or which one is the umbrella and which one's under the umbrella. But I think that's one of the problems and one of the causes of the confusion. But we will come back. We will come back to that. I'm going to, please keep typing in your questions and thoughts. And Michael, will you remember that we can talk a bit more about data information, DIKW pyramid? And there was something else that I said we could talk a bit more about. Oh yes, what we can do to end the confusion. I'd really like to talk about to that and get some of your ideas as well. Yeah, no problem. I'm now going to move on. Thanks, Michael. Okay, so the difference between KM and IM. Right, we've already looked at some definitions of KM and IM, and I know you're a knowledgeable group of people. So I'm going to go straight to the difference between knowledge and information. This is where you might start to disagree with me. Maybe not on this slide. So there are three common distinctions between knowledge and information. Here they are. So the first one is that knowledge can't exist without people. Information, once it's been created by people, somewhere along the line, exists on its own. The second one is that knowledge is always intangible. It is not a thing. Whereas information is, it is tangible in the sense that it has a physical or digital form. Although confusingly, it's usually classed as an intangible asset. But yes, information is a thing, knowledge is not a thing. And the third one is that people need knowledge to make decisions and take actions. Information is usually an input to this knowledge, but human understanding has to be applied to information. Sense making has to happen to turn it into knowledge, and it's the knowledge that is the basis of decisions and action. And if you remember the Standards Australia definition of knowledge, it did include something rather like that. Most people, I think, most specialists would accept these distinctions. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper, and I'm not going to read all this out. Experts start to differ when it comes to codified knowledge, tacit knowledge, and explicit knowledge. What's on this slide is my view. It is shared by many others, but not by everyone. The main departures from this view is whereas I believe that codified knowledge is information and you can have explicit knowledge that has not been codified. Some people believe that explicit knowledge is the same as codified knowledge, and that not codified knowledge is tacit knowledge, regardless of whether it could easily be codified. So wheelbarrow test, sorry, I just spotted the wheelbarrow test. I know where the wheelbarrow test came from. Yes, Erica. Yeah. So this is fairly detailed. Important point though, whatever view we take of the relationship between knowledge and information, for at least some of the time, when we talk about knowledge management, we use codified knowledge to refer to information. So wherever we are in our different views of what these words mean, knowledge management includes some information management, or looking at it another way, information management theory in particular should be applied to the tangible outputs of knowledge management. So now let's have a look. We're going to have a look at knowledge and information in AI, big data and machine learning. And we're going to start, Louise, with a poll. Are you ready, Louise? Okay, so the whole question is there this time. Which best describes the output from a computer that uncovers patterns by analysing vast amounts of data? Is it knowledge, insights, information? It depends. Don't know, don't care. I won't be offended if you put don't know, don't care. Okay. Information is clearly ahead. Not far behind is insights, and a significant number of it depends responses. And Dom says it depends on the techniques being used. Oh, right, this is going to be interesting. Okay, can we close the poll, please? Thank you. Right. Okay. I'm not an expert on AI and machine learning, but I do know I can see that the language that's used causes a lot of confusion. Data mining, for example, this is just within AI and machine learning. Data mining hasn't got anything to do with digging data out of holes in the ground. It's actually to do with finding previously unknown and potentially useful patterns in large amounts of data, like in the poll question. But are these patterns knowledge? Are they a kind of knowledge? If as in this slide, if the patterns are presented to the user in a graph or using some other visual representation, then no, I don't think that is knowledge. In KM terms, anyway, and this is important in KM terms, this is information, and it has to be interpreted and evaluated by humans to turn it into knowledge before it can be used to inform decision making and to take actions. And of course, human input, human knowledge is needed earlier in the process, for example, to decide what data the computer is going to use and what methods are available to the computer. But the AI definition of knowledge is different from the KM meaning, and this is an instant source of confusion because it isn't obvious that it's different. In AI, knowledge is information, and it includes things like beliefs and rules organized in a way that a computer can use them. And the whole process of finding patterns in large amounts of data is called knowledge discovery. Some AI specialists use the term knowledge for the outputs that I've called information on this slide, saying that they are knowledge about the data. Others would agree with me, other AI specialists would say, no, these patterns are information, and they take the view that humans have to understand and interpret the patterns to create knowledge. There's more. And I think this might be where, I'm guessing this might be where Don was going with the it depends. If we give the computer a giant concept map of the whole subject area that it's analysing data in, and we give the computer some reasoning and decision-making rules, the computer could learn how to do some of the interpretation of the patterns itself. Is that knowledge? Does that become knowledge now? In AI terms, it might be. In KM terms, I think it's still information, but it's getting closer to knowledge. And as far as I know, we don't have a term to describe the outputs of this kind of computer interpretation, or indeed of machine learning. If anybody knows of a term for the looks a bit like knowledge outputs from this scenario, could you type it into the chat, please? It's gone quiet. I really want to know. If it hasn't already got a label, perhaps we should call it artificial knowledge to differentiate it from human knowledge. Okay, we're going to come back to machine learning in a minute, because the question now really is, does any of this matter? You know, I think it does. It doesn't matter that experts disagree. It doesn't matter that we can't agree on the detail of definitions. But in practice, the meanings that we attach, especially to knowledge and information, have a direct effect on the way that we approach KM and IM and on our expectations of AI. Okay. So this table is based on studies of organizational knowledge and the finding that there are 3 common perspectives. Each perspective has a corresponding approach to KM and typical practices associated with the view of knowledge. I'll just give you a few moments to have a look at the table. And I've got 3. There's some fascinating discussion going on. I'm trying not to be distracted by the chat, but I am. Some fascinating stuff about AI, which we will definitely come back to. I've got 3 points to make on this slide. The first one is that to me, thinking isn't knowledge and KM at all. It's information management and IM. It's also the closest to the AI perspective. There is, interestingly, on the AI side, I'll get this pointer to do something. What in machine learning, there is something about, there's something rather close to imitating what we do in this doing thinking, the part of knowing that comes only from practical experience. When data is analysed, if it's real-time data, especially, it's becoming very, very close to that. I still think the outputs are information. My second point on this table is that these 3 perspectives are very close to Nancy Dixon's 3 eras of KM. Now, they were the 2 bits of research and reflection that went into producing the 2 were developed completely independently. It isn't possible to be sure, but I think it's likely that the early KM practices that included information management might have legitimized the thinking perspective shown in this table. And the third point is that although most people instinctively know that knowledge is somehow deeper than information, and so people might say that their perspective on knowledge is a knowing thinking or a doing thinking perspective, they still approach KM not using the corresponding knowing or doing thinking approaches to KM, but using the thinking practices. And that, of course, can lead to organizations doing IM or AI and calling it KM. And it can also lead to organizations doing IM badly because they think they're doing KM. So why would they consider good IM practices? And in the worst case, it means that it can mean that organizations can miss out on good KM practices and good IM practices. I can't resist this comment. Thank you, Emma. Yes, you're absolutely right. They overlap. The knowing thinking and the doing thinking. Okay, back to the machine learning. There are some potentially serious consequences of confusion between the outputs of machine learning knowledge models and human knowledge. I'm doing it myself now. You might have read about the use of deep learning models to detect COVID-19 in chest x-rays. And models are usually trained using large data sets, but because of the rapid spread of COVID-19, and various other issues. There isn't a massive amount of data available, so the training data for these models is limited. The X-ray on the left was part of the training data, and these models here, these three models. The first two, the NN, they're neural network learning models, and this was a different one that the authors of the article this was taken from. They were trying to demonstrate that it was better. So the X-ray on the left was part of the training data, and you see that all three of the models predicted with a high degree of confidence that there is the presence of COVID-19. The X-ray in the middle, this hadn't been seen by the models before, and one model got the diagnosis wrong, and two got it right. The image on the right is quite clearly a cat. A human can instantly recognize a cat, but these models hadn't been trained to recognize anything other than chest X-rays. So as far as the models were concerned, everything was a chest X-ray. So they all predicted with an alarmingly high degree of confidence that that picture of a cat indicated that the presence of COVID-19. There are other issues, of course, as well with machine learning, a lot of them to do with data, and I'm sure you all know about the well-known issues with biases in data. There's also the risk of poor decision making, I think, based on unrealistic expectations for not necessarily, not this model where there's a cat, but unrealistic expectations of machine learning. If machines can interpret X-rays, which they can, will we stop training radiologists? If we stop training radiologists and find that the machines are getting the diagnoses wrong, something changes, the diagnoses are wrong, what will we do then? There might not be enough human knowledge left to pinpoint the problem or retrain the learning models. Can't decide that they don't like what they've learned. They can't think outside the box of their learning models and their training data, and I'm not sure that we will ever get over this issue completely. Now, that doesn't mean that machine learning and data analytics are important and useful. They are massively important and massively useful. I think we just need to be clear that they produce information that humans can use as an input to knowledge and then to improve decision making. And I'm not the only person thinking this way. And so I think that there is, strangely, an opportunity here to manage expectations of machine learning and clarify the difference between knowledge and information in the process. Right, I'm on to my final two slides before we go to discussion, so these will be quite quick. What can we do to end the confusion? There's a lot more in the article about this, and I'd be happy to talk about it, and I really would like your ideas. But I have got 5 related ideas for ending the confusion. The central idea is to treat KM and IM as distinct and complementary. So of course we need them both. Of course they go together. Yes, they might overlap. One might be a subset of the other, but they are different, and we need them both. They're both important. For this to happen, as knowledge and information management practitioners and professionals, we need to use the right words. We need to not use data, information, and knowledge interchangeably when we know the difference. And if we don't know the difference, well, we need to be careful with the words that we use. This means that we need to talk to information management and knowledge management people need to talk to each other more, and AI people. Now this is a massive challenge. I don't know how we do this. I know that there's a new AI standard under development, and I'm wondering whether the knowledge management group at BSI should get in touch with the AI people and say, look, we've got a bit of an issue here with some definitions. Can we at least label your definitions as specific to AI? So conversations are needed, I think, in various places and at different levels. certainly in the development of standards, but also, of course, in organisations, in professional associations, and those conversations are certainly happening in CILIP. And KM and IM boundary spanners, those of us that jump between the different subjects and are interested in the boundaries, we have a key role to play here. We also probably ought to focus on common issues, because although I focused here on the differences, there are some things that KM and IM have in common, and I think that both KM and IM professionals would like to clear up the confusion, so we've got a common objective. And finally, I think we should seize that AI opportunity. AI is in the news more and more, and it's an opportunity to straighten out some of the words that we use, and at the same time make sure that people don't have unrealistic expectations. So, final slide. Distinct and complementary. Even though we know knowledge management and information management can exist without the other, they're even more useful when we put them together, but they're not the same. So I'm just going to leave you with this final thought. What would happen if we didn't distinguish chairs from tables? How would anybody know what a good table was like, or what a good chair was like? And that's the end of my slides. Thank you. And Michael, back to the chat.
Yeah, there's some really amazing conversations going on, little comments. I mean, I know Erica put on this one about information is knowing that tomato is a fruit, but knowledge is not putting in your fruit salad. And I know that sort of feels quite similar to your curry analogy you used for knowledge management on a number of occasions. About it's a blend of different things you can put in it. You change and adapt as you go through. There's a lot of things around the clear definitions. People saying making sure that people understand what IM is compared to KM and how they work together. I think that's definitely so, especially with the AI stuff coming into it, a blend between understanding how they all fit together and how they all work together and how they sort of help each other do what needs to be done. Well, so there's stuff around that. Going back to an early comment from Ivan about lessons learned, is that information management? And I know that mean you have enough conversations about lessons learned and where your data goes to die, where your information goes to die. So I don't know if you want to talk about that at all. And
can we just say a little bit about lessons learned? I don't like the term, but one of the reasons I don't like it is because it means different things. Sometimes lessons learned does mean capturing lessons and sticking them in a database, in which case, yes, they're not necessarily learned. But sometimes lessons learned refers to the whole, especially in project management, refers to the whole process of reviewing, reflecting and learning. I think that's quite rare, but I don't usually defend lessons learned.
No, sorry. Like Dom's mentioned that he's tall enough to sit on a table, so it's okay for that one. Quite a few other people mentioned it at different places. Yes. They're talking a lot about tomatoes as well, so that's quite good. I think people was mentioned about will AI replace us? And Hank sort of mentioned about they've done some research on it, and it's not really performing any standard at the moment, so probably not. And also you mentioned about the medical elements as well about going forward, but you still need to have that human feel to be able to change and adjust and move as things go forward as well. And just last one for you, you mentioned about the IKM thing. Did you want to talk about that quickly before we finish?
Yeah, I sort of covered it without actually drawing any pyramids. Let me just go back. Okay. I think the point here is data doesn't automatically turn into information. Information doesn't automatically turn into knowledge, and it's not a one-way. It's not a one-way pyramid anyway, which is how it's usually used, because you can, if you have some knowledge and you codify it, what you produce is information. And so you can turn knowledge into information as well as you can turn information into knowledge. But the key thing is that you need knowledge to collect data. You need knowledge to decide what to collect, how to collect it. You need knowledge to analyze the data, even if a machine does it. If you're using a learning model in the machine, you still have to give the machine data so that it can learn how to learn. People's knowledge, human knowledge is everywhere. So that's the problem that I have with DIKW as a pyramid. And I have drawn it sometimes as as arrows going in different directions, with knowledge being squirted in at various levels. There are some interesting things in the. I'm loving some of Emma's comments. I am just picking out what I can see at the time that I look. Emma's comment about the language between table and chair. If we didn't have different words, we would use them in the same way. And I agree. Even though we're not all as tall as Don, we might well, and that's the effect that using the words knowledge and information and knowledge management and information management, that's why the way we use those words are important. Chair analogy, short term it's okay to use either, but there may be long-term ergonomic issues of doing so permanently. Yeah. And if you're trying to eat and you're sitting on the table,
you need to pick a
you
chair.
might find to reach your food if the food's on the chair.
No, there's been some great stuff there, and I think we could have conversations about all this separately and carry on the conversation at some point after. But thanks everyone for participating and sharing all your thoughts and adding your comments as well. So I know Judy will take those away and build on this as well.
I would. Thanks, Erica. Yes, you're right. It is a circle. It's not a pyramid. It is a circle, or possibly even a spiral. I've never managed to draw it. I've tried. I'll have another go now. I would just be very interested to know, and there are some comments. Thank you, Helen, about as knowledge and information professionals, we need to be careful about our use of language and distinguishing knowledge management and information management. We don't expect everybody to want to go into this sort of level of detail about definitions and philosophically why it's important. But it does have to be reflected in your actions as well. Has anybody got any other ideas or comments on my ideas for ending the confusion? Is it worth me going and talking to the AI people at BSI? I bet they won't listen. Well, sorry,
I think it'd be worth just getting people to have a conversation, really, for me, just understanding where they're going to go, because I know as a knowledge management person, I've always said that we're like a GP. We need to be aware of everything and be a translator or an interpreter. So understanding what they're doing at the AI level and how can we actually use it would be really important.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it won't produce anything. It will just be stacks of stuff that no one makes any decisions on.
Or even worse, politicians will make decisions like, let's not train radiologists, because these machines can make decisions, and that scares me for the reasons I explained.
Yes, that's I just mentioned that. So we work in silos. How can we sort of break those? Thrive on silos, just try and break that if we can. So that'd be quite interesting. So I'm going to stop you there. That's all right, Judy. Thank you very much. It's been a really interesting webinar and conversation as well. And thanks everyone for participating. It's been great as we've been going along. As we say, we can do lots of stuff off this as well. So let me just share this now. And I just wanted to sort of mention we've got a few other events coming up as well, and thank you everyone for taking part today. It's been amazing. So I mean, we think we had 92 people at one point on here, and God knows how many messages and chats and conversations we've had in the chat function. It's been really, really good.
Yeah, so please do follow the link in. Sorry to interrupt, Michael. The link to the chat and continue the conversation, and I'll join in as well because I won't be presenting.
Yeah, and so we've got a few new events coming up. So we've got Nancy Kindo's on thing with us today. She's got Reach Your Goals doing a playful principles for a productive and inventive meeting. So some things around Lego play and stuff like that. That's on the 4th of August. So you're welcome to come and join that for us. We've got a huge innovation summit which we were hoping to host back in March, April time. We had to postpone that for the moment. So we've got We've got some people from NASA on there, a couple of different professors from different universities. We've got a science fiction writer as part of that, so it's going to be over 3 days. So it'll be sessions in the afternoon for 2 days, and also a knowledge cafe as part of that as well. And also on the 19th of October, led by Erica, we've got our big kin lessons learned. So it's more about what we've learned over the last 19 years, but also what's been happening over the last few months with the COVID-19 response and how different organisations learning from that. So really, it's about sharing what we've learned from each other and how we can do stuff on this as well. And there's a few people mentioned on the chat as well. Just follow us on the Kin WBS on Twitter, or you can check out our stuff on LinkedIn as well. So some of the stuff we've been doing, adding some stuff up on there about that, and you can come and join us as part of it as well. So. Well, again, Judy, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you very much for taking part in today and sharing your insights. As always, very insightful. Being able to sort of demonstrate what's happening, what's going forward, what's happened in the past, and where we're going to go in the future as well. So it's been great to sort of get that feel about where you think it's going to go, because you do the thinking stuff, which is the great bit.